I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president accused me of grand theft of my own Rolls Royce sitting in my driveway. Excuse number 22-year-old kid legally owns a car like that? Funny thing is, the only thing stolen that day was my peace and quiet. Let me start from the beginning. The letter Aravaden, a Tuesday. Wedged between a gourmet dog biscuit catalog and an invitation to a charity gala I had no intention of attending. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of paper that tries to convince you it's important before you've even read a single word. At the top, in an elegant swirling font, were the words Magnolia Ridge Homeowners Association. My wife Sam was standing at the kitchen island arranging a bouquet of lies in a crystal vase. She glanced over at me, her smile as bright as the morning. Sun streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows. I held up the envelope with a theatrical groan. Brace yourself. Theffin police have sent another memo. I bet it's about the exact shade of beige our mailbox is allowed to be. Sam laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Did you use eggshell instead of a crew again, you monster? I tore it open, expecting a passive-aggressive reminder about lawn height or trash can visibility. Instead, my eyes landed on a string of words that made no sense together. Legal action, unauthorized vehicle, and title forfeit. I blinked, read it again. Anthem, a third time. They were suing me for my own car. I let out a short, sharp loo. It wasn't a funny situation, not really, but the sheer absurdity of it was. Something to behold. The document signed with a flourish by one Karen Glass, president of the HOA, claimed Ned. My cobalt blue Rolls Royce Spectre was, and I quote, an unregistered and unapproved commercial vehicle in violation of community bylaws. It further alleged, based on no evidence walksover, that I was operating an unlicensed luxury transport service from a home. The lawsuit demanded I immediately surrender the vehicle to the HOA for impoundment and inspection, pending a hearing where I would be required to prove ownership to their satisfaction. Failure to comply would result in immediate fines and eventually a lien on my property. I looked out through window at my driveway, where the Spectre sat gleaming. It was less a car and more a piece of silent rolling sculpture. We'd bought it to celebrate. A series of life-changing business deals. A testament to late nights and ramen noodle dinners finally paying off. It was a symbol of our success, sure, but more than that, it was a promise Sam and Andy made to each other to enjoy the ride. And now, this woman I'd never met was trying to take it. You're not going to believe this, I said, handing the letter to Sam. She wiped her hands on a towel and took it, her brow furrowing ass red. Her expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief, and then to a slow burning anger that I knew all too well. It was the same look she got when she saw someone being a bully. Sam is the kindest person I know, but her protective instincts are fierce. Mess with her, you get a polite but firm request to stop. Mess with someone shelves, and you've woken a sleeping dragon. She's suing us for our car. She's claiming we stole our own car. Two words hung in the air, ridiculous and unreal. Basically, I said, shrugging. She thinks it's a commercial vehicle, an Uber for billionaires. I guess I'm sure it's just a mistake, some kind of off-poor work glitch. I'll call the HOA office, clear it up in 5 minutes. I was confident, maybe a little arrogant. In my world, problems were logical. You identified the error. You applied the correct data, and the system corrected itself. I treated this like a bug in thaw code of our quiet suburban life. A simple patch would fix it. Magnolia Ridge was supposed to be our escape from that world. We'd moved here 6 months ago, seeking peace and quiet. We wanted a yard for a future dog, friendly neighbors who waved, and a life where the biggest drama was whose turn it was to take out the recycling. The community was beautiful with manicured lawns, old-growth oak trees, and a sense of curated tranquility. It was the American dream, shrink-wrapped and sold with a hefty monthly fee. Karen Glass was the self-appointed guardian of that dream. I'd only seen her once at a distance directing a landscaping crew with the precision of a drill sergeant. She was a woman who seemed to be powered by grievance and a bottomless supply of pink pantsuits. We'd heard whispers from other neighbors about her iron-fisted rule, her obsession with trivial infractions, her vendettas against anyone who dared to question her authority. But we'd kept our heads down, paid our dues, and enjoyed our privacy. We figured if we didn't bother her, she wouldn't bother us. It turned out we were wrong. Her brand of tyranny didn't require a provocation. It only required a target, and our beautiful, silent, electric blue car had apparently painted a massive one on our garage door. That, the next hour on the phone, navigating the HOA's automated answering service, which seemed designed by Samione, who hated humanity. Finally, I was connected to a woman who sounded bored and vaguely hostile. I explained the situation calmly and politely. I offered to email her a copy of the vehicle's title, the bill of sale, my driver's license, my birth certificate, and a DNA sample if necessary. Her response was a rehearsed robotic statement. All disputes must be addressed in writing to the board. Miss Glass handles all legal matters personally. You'll be notified of your hearing date. Click. She hung up on me. I stared at the phone. The confidence I'd felt earlier began to curdle into annoyance. This wasn't a glitch. A glitch is an accident. This felt deliberate. This felt personal. I was a problem solver, a man who built a career on finding elegant solutions to complex challenges. I refused to be defeated by a petty tyrant in a pantsuit. Okay, I said to Sam, who was now pacing the kitchen. Knee plan? Forget the phone? I'll go to the office. I'll handle this face to face. But when I pulled up the address for the HOA, a management office, my search engine returned, a result that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a commercial office building. It was a private residence. Karen Glass ran the Magnolia Ridge Homeowners Association, its bank accounts, and its legal proceedings from a desk in her own living room. The system wasn't just bugged. The entire operating code was corrupt, and she was the one who'd written it. My 5-minute fix was looking more and more like a full-blown war. And the first shot had just been fired directly at my front door. The next letter came 2 days later, this time by certified mail. The lawsuit was still on, but now it had company. A list of new, entirely fictional infractions had been added. There was a $5,000 fine for unapproved driveways or facing, apparently because the Spectre's tires had left the marks on my own concrete. Another $10,000 penalty was for noise pollution, which was hilarious considering the car was electric and made less noise than a golf cart. My personal favorite was a $20,000 citation for operating a home base at Boosness without a permit, citing the commercial vehicle as evidence. The total was now $35,000 in fines on top of threat of losing our car. It was no longer absurd. It was predatory. I could feel my pulse hammering in my temples. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was a shake-a-down. I called my lawyer, a sharp, nonsense woman named Jessica, who listened patiently before letting out a low whistle. This is a classic abuse of power case, she said. She's banking on you being too intimidated to fight. She thinks you'll just pay up to make it go away. She thought wrong, I said, my voice tight. What's our move? We fight it, obviously, Jessica replied, but it's going to be a process. These things can drag on. In the meantime, document everything, every letter, every interaction. Keep a log, don't engage with her directly. Sam and I tried to follow that advice. We tried to live our lives to ignore the cloud of anxiety Karen Glass had parked over our home, but she made it impossible. The very next evening, as Sam and I were sitting on the patio enjoying a glass of wine, 2 men in cheap, ill-fitting security uniforms appeared at the edge of our property. They didn't have a company logo on their shirts, just the word compliance. They stood there, arms crossed, staring at our house. They were clearly meant to intimidate us, a physical manifestation of Karen's power. I walked to the edge of the lawn. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" I asked, keeping my voice even. One of them, a beefy guy with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, smirked. "Just observing," he said, making sure all community guidelines are being followed. "On my private property?" I asked. "We're on the common area," he shot back, pointing to the strip of grass by the road. "We can stand here as long as we want." They stayed for 3 hours, silent and menacing, until well after dark. It was unsettling. Sam was visibly shaken, and my simmering annoyance had boiled over into cold, hard anger. This woman wasn't just filing paperwork. She was actively trying to terrorize us in our own home. The final straw happened that Saturday. I was in the garage detailing the Spectre. It was a therapeutic process for me, the methodical cleaning and polishing. I had music playing, nothing loud, just some classic rock. I was sophocist that I didn't hear the police car pull up until the officer was walking up my driveway. He looked young, uncomfortable, and tired of whatever he was about to say. "Sir, we got a call about a disturbance," he said, gesturing vaguely toward my garage. I turned off music. "Disturbance, officer. I'm washing my car." He sighed. "Duh." "Cal reported, and I'm just telling you what she said, that you were laughing maniacally and revving a loud engine, possibly preparing for some kind of street race." The older cop gave a tight nod. "For officer safety, sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Cold steel snapped shut on my wrists. Garen's shrill whoop cut through the afternoon. "See, I told you, he stole it." She spun her phone to her live stream, soaking up the cheers from her online echo chamber. 2 minutes later, the VIN check came back spotless. The Andra officer unlocked the cuffs and handed over my ID. "Everything's in order? Sorry for the hassle, Mr. Reyes." Across the street, Karen's grin melted faster than ice on an engine block. Phones lowered, gasps turned into cord coughs. Half the onlookers suddenly realized they'd been rooting for the wrong team. I just stared at him, lawing maniacally. The car was electric, didn't have an engine to rev. "Let me guess," I said. The caller was a Ms. Karen Glass. The officer's expression told me everything. He handed back my ID, shot Karen a withering look, and drove off, leaving her sputtering. "This isn't over, kid. Not by a long shot. That was it." She had weaponized the police. She had sent goons to my house. She was manufacturing tens of thousands of dollars in fake fines to extort me. My attempt to handle this logically had failed. My lawyer's advice to lay low felt like a strategy for victims. I was not a victim. I was a builder, a strategist, a man who protected his family. The system I had trusted, the HOA board, the legal process, even law enforcement, was either broken or actively working against me. That night, I sat in my office, the glow of my monitors casting long shadows on the wall. Sam came in and put a hand on my shoulder. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "I'm done playing defense," I said, turning to look at her. "This isn't a neighborhood, Sam. It's a war zone, and Karen Glass has no idea who she's fighting." "La Ahad." Spent my career building secure, impenetrable systems, finding weaknesses in my opponent's code and exploiting them. I had resources and skills that Karen, in her pink pantsuit of arrogance, couldn't possibly comprehend. She thought she was fighting a guy who would just write a check. She was about to find out she had picked a fight with a man who was going to dismantle her entire empire, one line of corrupt code at a time. The board had ghosted me. The cops had shrugged. It was clear I was on my own. But being on your own meant you gotta make your own rules of engagement. And my rules were simple. I didn't start fights, but I finished them. The war for Magnolia Ridge had begun. Karen Glass was about to learn every hard lesson about underestimating your enemy. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make sure she could never do this to anyone ever again. This was no longer about a car. It was about reclaiming our peace and delivering a brand of justice that HOA bylaws could never contain.
The time
For reacting was over. It was time to go on the offensive. The decision to fight back wasn't made in a moment of hot-headed anger. It was a cold, calculated choice made in the quiet of my home office with the hum of servers as my soundtrack. Karen Glass thought she was the apex predator of this manicured suburban jungle, but she was an amateur. I preferred data and precision. My first call wasn't to my lawyer. It was to my old friend and business partner, Rick. Rick is a genius. A guy who sees the world in network, packets and lines of code. He can find a digital needle in a planet-sized haystack, and he does it with the giddy enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. When I laid out the situation, he didn't offer sympathy. He had just asked one question. "So, when do we start?" That night, my home transformed from a sanctuary into a command center. I wasn't just going to watch Karen, I was going to create a complete 360-degree digital picture of her entire operation. This was my turf, my area of expertise. It was time to go to work. First came the eyes. I had a top-of-the-line commercial drone, a suitcase beast with a 12,000 camera and a thermal imaging payload. It was technically for surveying commercial properties, but its terms of use were flexible. I programmed it a silent, high-altitude surveillance pattern that kept it well within legal airspace over my own property, but gave it a perfect bird's-eye view of Karen's house 2 streets over. From 500 feet up, her property became a map of her life. We could see every car that came and went, every delivery, every late-night visitor. The drone was my unblinking eye in the sky, feeding a constant stream of high-resolution data to a secure server in my basement. Next, I repurposed my home security system. The standard motion-activated cameras were fine for catching porch pirates, but I needed something more robust. I installed a series of high-gain directional microphone on my roof, disguised as satellite dishes. They were aimed not at her house, but at the public street in front of it, legally capturing the ambient sounds of the neighborhood. The crown jewel was the thermal camera array mounted on the side of my house, facing her property. It couldn't see through her walls, of course, but it could tell me how many people were in the house, which rooms they were in, and when they came, and went all based on subtle heat signatures they created. Karen had sent goons to watch me. I was watching her in a way she couldn't have imagined. While I handled the hardware, Rick went to work on the software. He started with a deep dive into Thepoblikif, facing HOA website. It was a joke, a cheap template full of dead links and grainy photos. But to Rick, it was a doorway. Within hours, he'd found a dozen vulnerabilities. Back doors left open by a lazy developer years ago, head and hack it. Not yet. He just mapped the weaknesses, creating a digital blueprint of the entire system. He was like a safecracker listening to the tumblers fall, patient and methodical. "It's sloppy, man," he said over our encrypted comms link. "She's running the whole HOAS finances on a 5-year-old laptop with an outdated operating system and no firewall. It's not a fortress. It's a garden shed with a dollar store padlock." The more we dug, the more we realized that Karen's power wasn't based on sophisticated control. It was based in the fact that no one had ever bothered to look closely. She ruled through fear and apathy. Everyone was too scared or too tired to challenge her. That was about to change. Our first break came from an unexpected source, our comic relief neighbor, Derek. Derek was a retired accountant in his late 60s. A man whose primary hobbies were conspiracy theories and meticulous loudinton, the migratory patterns of birds in his backyard. He saw me launching the drone one afternoon and wandered over, his eyes wide with suspicion. "Is that one of them government chemtrail monitors?" Pointing a shaky finger at the sky. I decided a little bit of the truth was better than a complicated lie. "Something like that, Derek," I said. "Just keeping an eye on the neighborhood, for security." His eyes lit up. "Security? Good man. It's this glass woman. She's out of control. Did Yelk know she fined me $200 last month?" Said my wind chimes were a source of auditory blight. Auditory blight? I've had those chimes for 20 years. He then proceeded to give me a 15-minute monologue on every petty grievance he and other neighbors had suffered under Karen's reign. He was a walking encyclopedia of her abuse. He told me about the elderly widow who was fined for having a garden gnome that was 2 and 2 tall. He told me about the young family who was threatened with a lawsuit for putting up a swing set that hadn't been pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee, which consisted solely of Karen herself. He was a goldmine of anecdotal evidence, a chorus of dissent that proved my case wasn't isolated. It was a pattern. Armed with this new perspective, Rick and I intensified our search. We weren't just looking for dirt on Karen anymore. We were looking for justice for the entire neighborhood. Their all breakthrough came from the sky. The drone's thermal camera picked up something strange. Every night around 2 a.m., a car would pull into Karen's driveway and idle for exactly 15 minutes before driving away. The thermal signature showed the driver never got out. It was a recurring clandestine meeting. The car was a generic sedan, impossible to identify from our altitude. But Rick, using a bit of digital magic, was able to enhance the video feed and get a partial license plate number. He ran it through a few seem illegal databases he has access to, The car was registered to a shell corporation, and that shell corporation's registered agent was a man named Martin Glass. A quick search revealed Martin was Karen's brother, a distressed real estate developer with a history of shady deals and bankrupt projects. Why was he meeting his sister in the middle of the night in her driveway? What were they so desperate to hide? We had surveillance. We had anecdotal evidence. We had a link to a suspicious character. We were pulling at the threads of Karen's carefully woven tapestry of lies, and we could feel it starting to unravel. The simple paperwork glitch had become a full-blown forensic investigation, and we were just getting started. We still didn't have the whole story, but for the first time, we had a trail to follow. It was leading us deep into the darkness at the heart of Magnolia Ridge. The discovery, the late-night meetings with her brother, Martin, shifted our focus. This was no longer just about Karen's petty tyranny. It was about her connections. Rick and I turned our full attention to the digital breadcrumb trail left Bikram and her brother. We treated the HOA's network like a crime scene. Every byte of data was potential evidence. We dove into the cloud server where the host stored its official records. Meeting minutes, financial statements, vendor contracts, everything. It was protected. By a password that was, I kid you not, Magnolia123. Rick had it cracked in under 30 seconds. We were in. What we found was a masterclass in creative accounting. There were invoices for thousands of dollars paid to landscaping companies that didn't exist. There were contracts for pool maintenance services with addresses that led to empty lots. Money was flowing out of the HOA's accounts and into a web of shell corporations, all of which, after a few layers of obfuscation, led back to Thesum name, Martin Glass. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry bully. She was an embezzler. She was systematically draining the community's funds and funneling them directly to her brother. We spent days, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of righteous fury, meticulously documenting every fraudulent transaction. We built a forensic audit that was airtight, cross-referencing fake invoices with bank transfers and corporate filings. The scale of the theft was staggering. Over the past 3 years, Karen Glass had skimmed nearly $500,000 from her neighbors, all while finding them for the color of their mailboxes. We had her dead to rights on financial fraud. It was enough to put her away for years, but something still didn't feel right. It was a huge amount of money, sure, but the personal, vindictive nature off. Her attack on me seemed disconnected from simple greed. Why sue me over my car? Why send goons to my house? Embezzlement is a crime you commit in the shadows. Her campaign against me was loud, public, and aggressive. It drew attention, which is the last thing a criminal wants. The motive was still missing. The why was still a mystery. The answer, we suspected, lay in their communications. We needed to know what Watch and her brother were talking about. Legally, we couldn't just tap her phone, but my directional microphones on Thurov offered another possibility. They were aimed at the public street, but they were powerful. They could pick up stray signals, electronic noise, and fragments of wireless transmissions that bled out from the houses. It was a long shot, but Rick figured he could write an algorithm to sift through the terabytes of ambient noise we were recording, looking for patterns that matched wireless phone frequencies. He called it digital dumpster diving. It was a painstaking process. For 2 days, the servers churned, analyzing audio static, filtering out the sounds of passing cars, barking dogs, and Derek's wind chimes. We got thousands of false positives, snippets of baby monitors, cordless landline calls, and garage door peeners. It seemed like a dead end. I was ready to give up on the audio and focus on the financial trail. We had enough to bury her already. But Rick is stubborn. The signal is in there somewhere, man. He insisted, his eyes glued to a scrolling waveform on his screen. It's just buried under all this junk. He started applying more and more complex filters, isolating specific bands, and running them through a voice recognition program, tuned to the snippets of Karen's voice we'd picked up from, her yelling at the landscapers. And then on the third night, he found it. It wasn't a clear recording. It was faint, full of static, like a ghost on a bad radio station, but it was them. It was a phone call between Karen and Martin Glass, picked up by sheer luck as the signal. Bounced off a passing delivery track. I leaned in close to the speakers, turning the volume up. Straining to hear through the hiss. Martin's voice was slick and impatient. "Is it handled? Is the tech brat getting 's message?" he asked. "He's stubborn," Karen's voice replied, tight with frustration. "He's not rolling over like us others. He's asking questions." He called a lawyer. There was a pause. Then Martin's voice dropped, becoming colder, more menacing. "Then you need to push harder, Karen. The investors are getting nervous. They want to see progress. We need that lot. It's the only one with the right zoning and the Sightline's fourth waterfront access. Without his property, the whole EV spa deal, it falls apart." I felt the air go out of my lungs. It's an EV spa, a luxury electric vehicle spa on my lot. Suddenly everything clicked into place. The lawsuit over my electric car wasn't random. It was poetic, a sick inside joke. The fake fines, the harassment, the intimidation. It was all designed to do one thing, to make my life so miserable that I would sell my house cheap and get out of the neighborhood. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted my land, my home. Place Sam and I had chosen for our future was nothing more than a construction site to them. The $500,000 embezzlement wasn't the main event. It was just seed money for their real project. Framing me was step one. This wasn't a feud. It was a calculated Dick's real estate conspiracy. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Karen Glass was trying to use the power of the HOA, an organization meant to protect property values, to steal my property itself. She wasn't just a corrupt bureaucrat. She was a predator who had marked our home as her prey. That gloves didn't just come off. They were incinerated. My mission was no longer just about defending myself. It was about exposing a plot so rotten it threatened to swallow the entire community. And I had just found the blueprint. The recording changed everything. The game had a new name, and the stakes were infinitely higher. I played the audio for Sam. She listened in silence, her expression hardening with each word. When it was over, she didn't say anything for a long time. She just walked to the window and looked out at our yard at the Life We Wear building. "An EV spa," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They want to bulldoze our home to build a charging station with aromatherapy." She turned back to me, and the fire in her eyes could have forged steel. "So, what's the plan? And don't you dare tell me to be patient." "We are past patient." I had the evidence, a mountain of it, financial records, surveillance footage, and now the smoking gun conversation. The question was no longer if we would act, but how. My first instinct was pure, uncut rage. I wanted to plaster their courting all over the internet, burn Karen's reputation to the ground, and watch her smoldering empire from my front porch. It would be satisfying. It would be fast. But would it be justice? We sat in the living room late into the night, just me and Sam, talking it through. Rick was on standby, ready to execute whatever plan we chose. We could go to the police now. Sam suggested. "We have proof of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and we will," I said. "But think about it. The first time I called, they practically shrugged me off. They're dealing with real crimes. A complicated HOA dispute with digital evidence. It could get buried in paperwork for months. In the meantime, Karen and her brother could destroy evidence, cover their tracks, or even escalate things." I paced the floor, the gears in my mind turning. Purely legal approach felt too slow, too uncertain. It left the power in the hands of a system that had already failed us once. Purely vengeful approach, a simple data dump online, felt too chaotic. It would expose her, yes, but it wouldn't necessarily dismantle the corrupt structure she had built. It wouldn't protect our neighbors. It wouldn't guarantee that someone just like her couldn't take Herpless. "This isn't just about us anymore," I said, finally stopping in front of Sam. "She's been doing this 4 years. Think of Derek and his wind chimes. Think of that poor woman with the garden gnome. They bully dozens of people into submission. If we just take Karen out, her system of fear remains. The board is either complicit or terrified. The neighbors are too scared to speak up. Can't just cut the head off the snake. We have to burn the whole nest." This was the moral crossroads. Was this about revenge, or was it about reform? Was my goal to punish one person, or was it to liberate an entire community? The question at the heart of this whole nightmare echoed in my mind. How far will a man go to defend his own? And the answer became crystal clear. He goes all the way. Not just to protect his house and his wife, but to protect the very idea of home. Of a community where people feel safe and justice is more than just a word in a legal document. My skills gave me the power to do more than just win a personal battle. They gave me the power to be a force for change. It was a responsibility I couldn't ignore. Okay, Sam said, her voice firm. No half measures. We expose everything. Not just to the police, but to the whole neighborhood. We give them the truth, and we let them be the jury. Just like that, the plan was born. It wouldn't be a quiet takedown. It would be a public spectacle, a revolution. The annual HOA meeting was in 1 week. It was Karen's favorite event, her yearly coronation, where she would stand before the residents, report on her accomplishments, and condescendingly remind them of the rules. This year, the meeting would have a different agenda. It would be her trial. We would turn her stage into a witness stand. We would use her own meeting, her own platform against her. The plan was audacious, and it was risky. We would need to be flawless in our execution. For the next week, our house was a hive of activity. Rick built a self-contained presentation pack, a Trojan horse loaded with all our evidence. The forged invoices, the BAME statements, the drone footage of her brothers, late-night visits, and the damning audio recording. It was all encrypted and loaded onto a thumb drive, ready to be plugged into the meeting room's projector system. I reached out to neighbor Derek. I didn't tell him everything, just that I had found some financial irregularities and planned sobering them up at the meeting. His reaction was electric. He immediately started making calls, rallying the other disgruntled residents, the victims of Karen's petty fines and power trips. He became our town crier, spreading the word that this year's meeting was one you didn't want to miss. A quiet rebellion was brewing, a groundswell of discontent that was ready to boil over. The night before the meeting, Karen Mattione last desperate move. Her 2 compliance commandos showed up again, this time banging on our front door, shouting that we were in violation of a new rule about unauthorized exterior lighting because our porch light was apparently the wrong Kelvin temperature. It was pathetic. It was a final clumsy attempt at intimidation. I didn't even open the door. I just activated the sprinkler system, not the lawn sprinklers. The high-pressure targeted sprinklers I had installed around the driveway for just such an occasion. A sudden, powerful jet of water shot out from the flower beds, drenching both men. From head to toe, they slipped and fell in the wet concrete, sputtering and cursing as they scrambled back to their car, completely humiliated. I watched them on the security monitor, a small, satisfying smile playing on my lips. It was a petty victory, but it was a sign of things to come. The tide was turning. The trap was set. All the pieces were in place for the final act. Tomorrow at the Magnolia Ridge Community Center, the show would begin. And Karen Glass had an idea she was the star. The day of the annual meeting arrived. Gray and overcast, as if the sky itself knew a storm was coming. I put on a crisp suit. Not for Karen, but for myself. Felt like armor. Sam gave me a quick kiss at the door. "Give them hell," she said, her eyes shining with pride and a little bit of nervous excitement. Rick was already parked down the street. From the community center, manning our mobile command post from his laptop, hit a back door into the center's Wi-Fi and draws ready to initiate the live stream on my signal. As I walked into the meeting room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. About 50 neighbors were there. It's more than double the usual turnout. They sat in stiff plastic chairs, their faces a mixture of fear, resentment, and a flicker of hope. Derek gave me a subtle nod from the front row. The head of the room, behind a long folding table, sat Karen Glass. She was in her element. Wearing a power red blazer and an expression of smug authority, she beamed at the large crowd, completely mesmerizing. The room, she thought it was a testament to her leadership. She had no idea it was a firing squad. She started the meeting with her usual congratulatory speech, droning on about property values and the successful first of the color palette for garden gnomes. I let her talk. I let her dig her own grave with every condescending word. She was the picture of confidence, oblivious to the fact that her entire world was about to be set on fire. She finally opened the floor to questions from the residents, a formality she usually rushed through. "Yes, Mr. Henderson," she said, pointing at me with a perfectly manicured finger, a shark smiling at a minnow. "I trust her here to discuss the outstanding liens on your property." "Actually, no," I said, standing up and walking calmly towards the front of the room. "I'm here to give a presentation." I held up the thumb drive. "I have some information about the HOA's finances that I think everyone here will find illuminating." A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's smile faltered. "All presentations must be pre-approved by the board," she snapped.
What?
"That's not on the agenda."
What?
"Then let's amend the agenda," a voice called out from the back. It was Derek, another neighbor shouted. "Yeah, let's hear him out." Suddenly, the room was filled with voices of support. The dam of fear had broken, cornered, and with her authority crumbling before her eyes, Karen had no choice. "Fine," she hissed through gritted teeth, "but make it quick." I walked to the podium, plugged the drive into the laptop connected to the projector, and took a deep breath. "Rick, we're live." I whispered into my watch in Rick's van. Single keystroke sent a live video feed of the meeting to a private YouTube link, which was simultaneously emailed to every single resident of Magnolia Ridge, the local news outlets, and the state attorney general's office. The show had begun. The first image that flashed onto the huge screen behind Karen was a copy of $10,000 fine she'd given me for noise pollution. Next to it, I played a video of the specter gliding silently out of my driveway. The only sound was birds chirping. The room was silent. Then, one by one, the forged invoices appeared on the screen. Landscaping by a company whose address was a P.O. box in another state. Pull services from a business that had been defunct for 5 years. Each invoice was followed by the corresponding bank statement showing a transfer to a shell corporation. And on the final slide of the section, complex flow chart that showed every single one of those corporations leading to one man, her brother Martin Glass. Gasps rippled through the audience. People were pulling out their phones, watching their neighbors' reactions, realizing the scope of the betrayal. Karen's face had gone from red to a pasty, sickly white, but I was just getting started. I put up the drone footage, the grainy, high-altitude video of the sedan pulling into her driveway night after night. I showed them the partial license plate and the registration tracing it back to her brother. The murmurs grew louder, angrier. People were standing up, pointing at the screen, then at Karen. Her 2 compliance commandos who had been standing by the door trying to look tough were now looking at each other. And at the increasingly hostile crowd, they saw the writing on the wall. They weren't security. They were paid actors in a play that was reaching its disastrous finale. Without a word, they quietly slipped out the back door, abandoning their queen. And then, for the grand finale, I let the audio play. Thetany, static-filled recording of her phone call, her voice filled with contempt, filled the room. "He's stubborn, not rolling over like the others." And her brother's voice cold and clear. "We need that lot. Without his property, the whole Eve's spa deal falls apart." It was like a bomb had gone off. The room erupted. It was no longer a meeting. It was a mutiny. People were on their feet shouting, demanding answers, calling her a thief, a liar, a criminal. Derek was leading the charge, waving a copy of his wind chime, fine like a battle flag. Karen just sat there frozen, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. She had been so insulated by her own power, so certain of her control, that the idea of being held accountable had never even occurred to her. She looked small, pathetic, a tyrant without an army. But just as I was about to signal Rick to cut the feed and let the mob have its justice, my watch buzzed. It was a message from Rick. It contained just one sentence, but it was a sentence that made my blood run cold. "Dude, y'all need to see this. I found one more file. It's bad. Really bad." The show wasn't over. There was one last twist, one final horrifying layer to this conspiracy that was about to be peeled back. And I had a sickening feeling that this last revelation was going to be the one that brought the whole house off cards down. It's not just on Karen, but on something much, much bigger. The message from Rick buzzed on my wrist again, more urgent this time. Check your inbox now. The room was still in chaos. A sea of angry faces, all directed at the paralyzed figure of Karen Glass. I held up a hand, and to my surprise, the noise subsided slightly. They were looking tome now. I had become the leader of this impromptu revolution. I subtly glanced at my phone. Rick had sent me a single file, a scanned PDF document. The titly at the top read, Geotechnical Soil Analysis Report. 124 Willow Lane. My address. My heart pounded against my ribs. I opened the file. It was a formal official-looking report. Filled with geological jargon, soil density charts, and moisture content tables, it looked completely legitimate. The summary on the final page was stark and terrifying. It concluded that the substrate on my property was critically unstable due to an undocumented subterranean spring, which recommended the existing structure be condemned and demolished for safety reasons. The report was dated 3 weeks from now. It was a ghost from the future, a document Karen was planning to use as her final move after she'd driven out. It was her checkmate, forged, of course. But that wasn't the twist. Theatwist was at the bottom of the page. The report was stamped and signed. The signature belonged to a Dr. Alistair Finch, a respected geologist, but the official seal pressed. Into Thepapur, the one that gave the document its undeniable authority, wasn't from a probate firm. It was the seal of the Magnolia Ridge City Planning Commission, and the name of the commissioner who had dapperly reviewed and co-signed this fraudulent report. The man who was about to sign the death warrant for my home was a name I recognized. From Rick's earlier research into Martin Glass's business dealings, Commissioner Thompson, he wasn't just a corrupt city official. He was listed as a silent partner in the holding company for the EV spa project. This wasn't just an HOA matter anymore. This wasn't just embezzlement or a real estate scam. This was a criminal conspiracy that reached into our local government. Karen wasn't just a queen in her tiny kingdom. She was a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. She had powerful allies, people who could make a house, and maybe even a person, disappear with the stroke of a pen. A cold dread washed over me, followed by a surge of pure adrenaline. This changed the stakes completely. We weren't just exposing a crooked Hope resident. We were taking on a corrupt city official with the power to retaliate in ways we couldn't. Imagine. I had a choice to make right there in front off everyone. I could stick to the original plan, let Karen take the fall, and hope the rest of it stayed buried. It was the safe move, or I could go Ellen. I could pull this final rotten root out into the light, no matter how deep it went or what it was connected to. I looked over at Karen, the shockhead, worn off, replaced by a flicker of something else in her eyes. It was arrogance. A tiny, defiant smirk played on her lips. She thought she was still protected. She thought she had an ace in the hole. She thought her connection to Commissioner Thompson made her untouchable. She had no idea I was holding her final, desperate play in Thepin of my hand. I made my decision. There would be no half measures. One last thing, I said, my voice cutting. Through the remaining noise in the room, I airdropped the PDF from my phone-tough laptop. The forged geological report flashed onto the screen, massive and undeniable. I zoomed in on the conclusion, the recommendation to condemn my home. Fresh. Wave of shocked silence washed over the room. Then I zoomed in on the signatures, on Commissioner Thompson's name, on the official seal of the City Planning Commission. This, I said, my voice ringing with cold fury, is what was going to happen to my family's home next month. This is a forged geological survey signed by a city official who was a silent partner in the very project they wanted to build on my land. I let that sink in. I could see the understanding dawning on people's faces. This was bigger than lawn maintenance fees. This was about the fundamental croup of the systems they trusted to protect them. This was about their homes, their safety, their community. That was the moment the mutiny became a full-blown uprising. The anger in the room transformed from a chaotic row into a focused, unified force. People weren't just yelling at Karen anymore. They were pulling out their phones. But this time, they weren't just recording. They were calling the mayor's office, calling the district attorney, calling the investigative reporters at the local news station, whose link Rick had so thoughtfully provided. The digital firestorm we had started was about to become a real-world inferno. That trap I had set for Karen Glass had just caught a much bigger fish, and the entire corrupt ecosystem of Magnolia Ridge was about to be dragged out into the sunlight, kicking and screaming. Karen's face finally, truly crumbled. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the raw, naked panic of a cornered, the animal who knew with absolute certainty that the game was over and there were no more moves to make. The implosion was swift and spectacular. As the residents of Magnolia Ridge collectively dialed for justice, Karen Glass finally broke. She shot up from her chair, her eyes darting towards the exit like a cornered rat seeking an escape. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She didn't try to defend herself. The mountain of digital evidence culminating in the forged-cited document was simply too high to climb. She shoved past a stunned Derek knocking over a car of water and made a desperate scramble for the door. The crowd parted before her, not out of fear, but out of a kind of disgusted fascination. They were watching the complete and total collapse of a tyrant. She burst out into the overcast afternoon, and for a moment, I thought she might actually get away. But Rick, ever a strategist, had anticipated this. He had made one more call before the meeting started. As Karen stumbled across the community center parking lot, 2 police cruisers, their lights now flashing, pulled in to block the exit. These weren't the same tired, dismissive officers from before. These were detectives, their faces grim and serious. Sent by the DA's office, Karen's panic turned into pure primal flight. She saw an old forgotten golf cart parked by the tennis courts, keys still in the ignition. In a final pathetic bid for freedom, she leaped into it, slammed the accelerator, and took off across the manicured lawn. Deckert bounced and swerved, tearing up the pristine turf she had lured it over for years. It was a perfect ironic image. Off her legacy, a trail of destruction in her wake. Her escape lasted all of 15 seconds. She careened across the grass, lost control, and crashed directly into the side of one of the waiting Palisa cruisers with a dull thud. Have to run. They just walked over to the golf cart, where Karenza dazed amidst the wreckage of her own pathetic getaway, and calmly put her in handcuffs. A spontaneous cheer erupted hemmed the crowd of neighbors who had spilled out onto the lawn to watch. It was a sound of pure cathartic release. Years of suppressed frustration and fear were exorcised in that single, triumphant roar. Inside, the HOA board members, who had been Karen's silent enabling court, were surrounded by angry residents demanding their immediate resignation. Faced with the fury of the community, they had failed. They folded instantly, scribbling their resignations on the back of meeting agendas. The old guard was finished. The corrupt regime had fallen in less than an hour. Thieftermouth was a whirlwind. Investigators from the DA's office sealed Karen's home and the HOA office, which was off course, the same place. Commissioner Thompson was suspended from his duties that afternoon and taken into custody by the end of the day. The news trucks that had been cautiously parked down the street now swarmed the community center, their cameras capturing the jubilant faces of my neighbors. Derek, now the de facto community spokesperson, was giving a passionate interview to a local reporter, waving his wind chime fine as he detailed Karen's reign of terror. He was having the time of his life. A few days later, a special election was held. A new HOA board was voted in, comprised of people who had been the victims of Karen's abuse. Their first official act was to nullify every fine Karen had issued in the past 5 years. Their second was to hire a legitimate independent accounting firm to sort through the financial mess she had left behind. The lawsuit against me was of course thrown out. My name was cleared, but more importantly, the cloud of dread that had hung over Magnolia Ridge was gone, replaced by a sense of empowerment and unity. People were talking to each other again, not in hushed whispers, but out in the open. There were block parties. There were neighborhood cookouts. Community wasn't just healing, it was being reborn. It turned out the best way to protect property values wasn't with an iron fist and a list of draconian rules. It was by building a place where people actually wanted to live. About a week after the showdown, Sam and I were sitting on our patio. The same spot where we had been intimidated by Karen's fake security guards. The air was calm. The only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves in the oak trees. It was the peace we had moved here for. Pesithit was now real because it had been fought for and won. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Rick. It was a link to a news article. The headline read, "Former HOA President and City Commissioner Indict. In sweeping corruption and fraud case, justice wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. It was a headline. It was a court date. It was the promise that the people who abused their power would be held accountable." E showed the phone to Sam. She smiled, a real relaxed smile, and leaned her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You didn't just defend us. You saved this whole neighborhood." An in-thought moment, looking out at our quiet street, I knew the answer to that question that had driven me from thievery beginning. How far will a man go to defend his own? He'll go all the way to the truth. Because defending your own isn't just about protecting your four walls and your property line. It's about defending the principles of fairness, justice, and community. It's about ensuring that the place you call home is truly a sanctuary, not just for you, but for everyone who shares it. I stood up and walked to the garage, the heart of where this whole insane battle began. The Spectre sat there, its cobalt blue finish gleaming under the lights. It was more than just a car now. It was a symbol of a fight we never asked for, but a fight we had finished. The dust settled faster than I expected. The legal system, now fully engaged and fueled by a mountain of undeniable evidence, moved with surprising speed. Karen Glass and her brother Martin, faced with a laundry list of charges from fraud and embezzlement to conspiracy, took plea deals to avoid a drawn-out and humiliating public trial. They would serve time. Commissioner Thompson was fired, disgraced, facing his own set of felony charges that would likely land him in the same place. The EV Spa project, built on a foundation of lies and corruption, evaporated overnight. The investors vanished and the holding company was dissolved. My home and my neighborhood were safe. The new HOA board, led by a surprisingly effective President Derek, began the process of rebuilding. The bylaws were rewritten from scratch, focusing on community well-being. Rather than punitive control, the stolen funds, or at least what could be recovered from Karen's seized assets, were returned to the HOA's accounts. Magnolia Ridge was breathing free for the first time in years. Sam and I found our peace. It's a tension that had been a constant. Unwelcome guest in our home for months was finally gone. We slept better, well-odd more. We started talking about getting that dog we'd always wanted. The war was over, and the quiet, tranquil life we had sought when we first moved here was finally our reality. We weren't just residents anymore. We were part Oife community, bonded by the shared experience of overthrowing a tyrant. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact now waved enthusiastically. The atmosphere of fear had been replaced by one of genuine friendliness and mutual respect. We had inadvertently become the catalysts for the very thing we had been searching for. One sunny Saturday morning, I decided it was time. I went out to the garage, pulled the cover off the Spectre, and took a moment to just look at it. The car that had started it all. It wasn't a status symbol or a target anymore. It was just a beautiful machine, piece of engineering art. It represented the life we had built and the lengths I would go to protect it. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cool and smooth. The silent press of a button, the engine came to life without a sound. I backed it slowly out of the garage, the cobalt blue paint glittering in the morning sun. I paused at the end of my driveway and looked down the street. It was a perfect suburban scene. Kids riding bikes, a neighbor watering his flowers, the gentle hum of a lawnmower in the distance. No fake security guards, no menacing stares, just peace. Sam came out and got in the passenger seat, her smile lighting up the car. "Where to?" she asked. "Anywhere," I said, and I meant it. The Spectre's most unique feature is its doors. They call them coach doors, but the world has always known them by another name, suicide doors. They're hinged at their rear, opening outward from the center of the car. As I reached over and pressed the button to close Sam's door, it swung shut with a quiet, satisfying thud. The name had always seemed a bit morbid, but no, it felt oddly appropriate. We had faced down a plot that was meant to be the end of our life here, and we had turned it back on its architects. We pulled away from the curb, gliding silently down the street, past Dirac shows, with its now famous wind chimes tinkling merrily in the breeze. He saw us, gave a big thumbs up, and went back to trimming his prize-winning roses. We were just another family in another car and another quiet Saturday morning, but we knew the truth. We knew the fight it had taken to earn this moment of simple, uncomplicated peace. The lesson in all of this was crystal clear, and it wasn't I'd carry with me forever. You don't have to be a soldier to fight a war. You don't need an army to win one. Sometimes all you need is the truth, the tools to uncover it, and the will to see it through to the end. Justice, I learned, isn't always delivered by a judge in a courtroom. Sometimes it's served by an ordinary person who refuses to be a victim. Sometimes it's time-stamped, notarized, and delivered through a live stream. And sometimes, on a perfectiony day, it comes rolling silently out of a garage. A cobalt blue testament tuth. Fact that when you push a good man too far, he will push back with everything he has, and he will win. The gates of Magnolia Ridge were open, and the road ahead was clear. We're finally free to just enjoy the